Brian Kemp of Georgia. Thank you so much for receiving us here.
Oh, glad to be with you. Thank you.
You know, there's a saying that people vote with their feet, and in 2023, Georgia was among the states that attracted the most people. Why are people choosing to live in your state?
Well, I think also people say it's going to be a pocketbook election, and I think people are voting with their feet to come to Georgia because we have just such a great economy, great place to live, raise your family, but also to work. And so, I really think that's why we're growing so much. We have a very, very competitive business environment, but, it's culturally just a great place to live. There's a lot to do. It's a great place to raise your family. And so I think all of those things benefit our state, which is why we're growing.
What has been your greatest achievement in office, and what remains to be accomplished in this second term?
Well, I think the thing I'd probably say is it's not just one achievement that we've done, but I really have been able to accomplish everything that I campaigned on in 2018 when I ran for my first term, and then after the re-election campaign in 2022. Really the first legislative session after that, we fulfilled every promise that I ran for re-election on. And back then, it was really trying to help Georgians fight through 40-year high inflation, deal with public safety issues that we were seeing because of, a lot of liberal or Democratic run local governments or prosecutors that weren't going after, hardened criminals and street gangs. And so people were really worried about those kind of things. They were worried about being able to pay for groceries and gas and a lot of other things that were going on, and they wanted to have a good paying job. And that was really what we focused on in the re-election campaign. And so, I think probably my greatest accomplishment is just doing what I told people I would do, fulfilling my promises. And I think that's what people and voters are looking for. They're tired of politicians that will say one thing and do another, or say one thing and do nothing at all. And they're just looking for people that will simply tell them, this is what I'm running on. If you elect me, this is what I'm going to do. And then having people that get in office and actually complete those things. And we've been able to do that, thankfully, with a lot of great team members in the General Assembly.
Mm-hmm. And among those promises, if you have to name one top priority for these almost 2 years.
Well, look, for me, I think, my biggest priority is keeping people safe and keeping our community safe. That's something I ran on in 2018, and we've been very focused on that, going after street gangs, ending human trafficking, and making sure that people felt safe in their local communities. And that affects your business environment as well. And so, we've really been focused on that a lot. And I think that's one reason I got reelected, is because I was running against somebody that wanted to defund the police and, really not go after hardened criminals like I was talking about doing, and making sure our communities are safe.
And moving on to electoral topics, given that Georgia has now 2 Democratic senators and that the last 2 presidential races were close, why do you think Georgia has become a more purple state in the last couple of years?
Well, I really don't think Georgia's a purple state. I kind of think we're on the generic ballot, I think we're probably a 52-48 red state, 52 Republican, 48 Democrat. The 2020 election, there was a lot of things that went wrong that caused us to end up with 2 Democratic U.S. senators, which, in my opinion, we shouldn't have, and we shouldn't have lost the presidential race. But part of that was political, because there wasn't a good ground game, and there weren't the mechanics behind the campaigns to really turn out our voters and to go after persuadable voters and tell them what our message was, why we were going to be better for them in the future than the Democrats. But if you look at 2022, in my reelection campaign, we did those things. We created a ground game. We went after persuadable voters. We overperformed with African Americans, with Latinos, and also Asian Americans. And then we got back some of the suburb vote and metro vote that we didn't have in 2020 in the presidential race or in our U.S. Senate races, and I won by 7.5, almost 8 points. So it was really a red wave in 2022. Every other Republican on the ballot at the state level, the lieutenant governor, the school superintendent, the agriculture commissioner, the insurance commissioner, and so on, every one of them won without a runoff, and we all had libertarians in the race that normally take away from Republican candidates. And then we recently had a statewide election for an incumbent Supreme Court justice, and we had a liberal former Democrat that was running in that nonpartisan race, and the incumbent justice won that race. It was really a conservative versus a liberal race, and so we won that statewide race. And so, you know, we've righted a lot of the things that happened in 2020 and 2022, and then in May of this year, and we got to do that in November as well.
It's a matter of a strategy.
Well, I think it's several things. I mean, it's obviously strategy. It's obviously raising the money and having the organization to have everything the campaign needs to turn out the vote and to get your message out. But then the other thing, and the most important thing, is you got to have a good candidate or candidates. You know, you got to have good candidates on the ballot that can win in November. And that's, you know, that's obviously what we had in November of 2022. It's what we had in May in the nonpartisan judicial race. And it's what we're going to need as we go into the elections in 2024. And I think, you know, we certainly have that. And my focus is making sure that, you know, from the bottom of the ticket at the top, we're getting the vote out to hold our legislative majorities, but make sure we're also winning at the top of the ticket.
And talking about that top of the ticket, are you prepared to endorse President Trump this year?
Well, look, I've already said and have for a long time that I was going to support our nominee. I mean, I said that way back, you know, during the heat of the nomination process for the primaries, and that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to support the whole Republican ticket, and including President Trump.
Did you spoke with him in the last couple of years after the 2020 election?
I hadn't spoken to him.
Never, in a phone call, nothing.
No, but that's okay.
Okay. And how do you rate the Biden administration?
Not good.
Okay.
I mean, look, I think if you look, and this is the opportunity that President Trump has running against Joe Biden, is, you know, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I think most Georgians, most Americans would tell you, no, they're not. They're paying more for groceries. They're paying more for rent. They're paying more for insurance. You know, they're paying more for gasoline. They're paying more for energy prices. You have a disaster at the border. You know, our weakness around the world. I think there's just so many things that Joe Biden has not been a good president on. And I think that's what this election is going to be about. It's going to be about those issues.
And having faced many political campaigns over the year, what are the average Georgia voter top priority for this time?
Well, I really think that this is going to be a pocketbook election. You know, people are focused on how much it's costing them when they go to the grocery store, how much their rent has gone up. You know, can they even get a mortgage now? You know, you hear these stories about if people sold their house and bought another house comparable with today's market and mortgage rates, their payment would be twice as much as it is now. Those are the things that people are like, why is this situation like this? It wasn't like this 4 years ago. And they want to get back to, you know, that situation that we did have 4 years ago. And I think that's what people are going to be voting on. I think the Democrats are going to try to make this election about anything other than that. They're going to focus and try to distract and get Republicans distracted on a lot of other issues that are in our past. And I think as Republicans, we got to really be disciplined and focused on our message and making sure that we're talking to people about what we're going to do for them to help them fight through that high inflation and high grocery prices, and, you know, our energy policy and securing the border and things of that nature. And I think if we do that, we're going to have a really good night on November 4th or 5th, I guess it is.
And what would you tell to a guy who voted for Biden in 2020 and doesn't know what to do this time?
Well, I would just tell them, you know, to vote for who they think is going to make things better than it was, you know, than it is today, and like it was 4 years ago. And I think if that's what they're going to be voting on, I think they're going to vote for President Trump, or maybe even be voting against President Biden. I mean, look, there's going to be a lot of people in this election that are going to be voting against Donald Trump, and or for Trump, and there'll be some that are voting for Biden, but there's going to be other people that are going to be voting against something. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be voting against Joe Biden because of high prices, inflation, and the disaster at the border.
And assuming the GOP regains in November the White House and the Senate, do you think the Republican Party owes his voters some deficit control?
Well, I'm very concerned about spending. I mean, I think really over the last, really coming out of during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, we've spent more than we should have. We've also spent more on some issues that we should have, and haven't spent enough on other issues like our military defense and other things. And so I definitely think that is going to be a concern, and for us to be in a position where we can lower interest rates and mortgage rates, we got to get our fiscal house in order. And so I would hope that Republicans would do that.
And what do you think they didn't do before, like Trump and W. Bush? What happened to their administrations of spending?
Yeah, well, look, Republicans have been as guilty to blame on spending as the Democrats have. And so, we're just at a point now where you compare debt to GDP and the amount of spending that, I know you mentioned George W. Bush, but if you look at what spending was back then versus where it went, I mean, it was a sharp incline up. And so, way out of the norm. And, certainly when Biden got in office, he just doubled down on that spending. And the thing about that time was, we were paying people to stay home when we needed them to go back to work. If we were going to pay them something, we should have been paying them to go back to work, not to stay at home. And I think that was a really bad mistake early in the pandemic, and set our economy back. And it also created this inflationary environment that we're in. And that's what I think people are going to be voting against. I just don't think that Joe Biden and the policymakers around him really understand how much damage they've done with their policies.
They're just incompetent, or they don't know what.
No, look, I think they want it that way. I think they want people dependent on the government, whereas Republicans, that's not what we want. We want to have limited government and more individual freedom and responsibility, and let free markets work. And I think that's, really a stark difference between their policies of picking winners and losers, depending on what industry, helping union-backed companies versus non-union-backed companies, instead of making the playing field level for everyone. And that's really what you've seen out of the Biden administration.
Okay, and last question. Let's suppose Trump wins in November, I don't know, 10. He calls you, Governor, I need you to be part of the cabinet.
Well, I would just, look, I would be honored to receive a call like that. But look, my focus is on being governor. This is the best job in America is being governor. And I know there's a lot of competent people that he would, be able to pick to be in his administration. So I don't want to speculate on any of that, but I'm very happy in my current job. I intend to fulfill my whole 4-year commitment that I made to the people when I ran for re-election.
Okay, Governor, thank you.
Thank you.